Change the channel. The mind has been compared to a stage upon which our thoughts, the actors, perform for us. Our minds can be compared to a TV, and our thoughts to the programs we watch on the screen of our mind. The TV's remote is our mood or the feelings that govern what we desire to view, moment by moment. When we feel boredom, shame, loneliness, or rejection, these are called triggers. The brainstem naturally wants to change the channel to something that brings relief. Let's take a look at what this looks like. These emotional triggers force us to make choices about how to deal with feelings. The brainstem tells us to generate thoughts, or fantasies, that release pleasure chemicals for the brainstem to find relief in. At what point can you interrupt this cycle? Yes, you're right, in that split second when we recognize the triggers or those feelings of boredom, shame, loneliness, or rejection. That's when we have a choice to make about how to deal with unpleasant emotions. The brainstem thinks we're in a crisis. It thinks we should never have moments of despair, but that's simply not logical. It's not how life works. So we need to make sure that the pleasure chemicals cannot crowd out the frontal lobe in these moments. So even when addiction is in full force, there is always that split second to make a choice. And that split second becomes longer and longer as we rewire our brains using the techniques we will explore. So the key point to remember is this, that we always have that split second, but it happens right as we notice the trigger or those feelings of boredom, frustration, shame. So remember that. It's when we first notice the trigger, that's when we must react. We'll talk plenty more about what to do next. Addiction recovery expert George Collins has said that pornography addiction is really an addiction to our own thoughts. The key to freedom is to immediately recognize feelings of boredom, shame, loneliness, or rejection. Those triggers that the brainstem uses to trigger thoughts that release pleasure chemicals or fantasies. The first and best technique to master is called FREE, which stands for fight, replay, and empower. We'll go into a lot more detail into what that means. Fight, replay, empower, F-R-E-E. As soon as an unhealthy feeling or trigger is noticed, that's when we need to change the channel of our mind by fighting or striking out against that thought in your imagination, just like a mighty warrior for Christ would do. Then we replay a vision of something exciting that makes you feel good in a healthy way. Then we empower by expressing compliments or praise to ourselves and God for making ourselves powerful enough to turn away from and resist evil. You want to see yourself as powerful, see yourself as beating the impure thought, and see yourself as loved of the Lord. Replaying this vision daily makes it a habit. Replaying this vision as soon as you feel negative triggering feelings helps you overcome those. Replaying the vision will crowd out the impure thought and provide short-term pleasure that the primitive brainstem needs to replace the unhealthy fantasy. How well this works depends on your ability to first feel and recognize negative emotions immediately, and then next to fight, get yourself feeling empowered, replay the exciting positive vision that you have rehearsed to replace the brainstem's instinct to search for relief in a negative fantasy, and then finally your ability to consistently empower yourself by complimenting yourself after you have turned away. Give yourself praise that will again generate more pleasure chemicals. Few things feel as good to the human brain as a compliment. So compliment yourself. Enjoy and relish that empowering feeling that comes from turning away from evil. So first, fight, replay a positive vision, and then empower yourself through praise for turning away and being the man you want to be. Here's another way to visualize that process. You'll see the remote is our feelings. It tells us what programming we want to watch. Then we have that split-second decision when we can decide between two options. One, are we going to play the negative fantasy to give relief to the brain, relieve the boredom, the frustration, whatever it is that the remote is wanting to change the channel to? Or are we going to take the high road and replay the positive vision that connects us with God and who we really are? If the positive vision and praise is powerful enough to provide short-term pleasure, the brain will learn from repeated experience to change the channel to a positive vision that feels better than an unhealthy fantasy. As this becomes habit, the reaction time increases between negative trigger feelings and the brainstem's demand for pleasure chemicals through fantasy. This lengthened reaction time indicates that your self-image is becoming stronger and the addiction is becoming weaker. The brain is rewiring itself in response to negative emotions. That means the addiction is becoming weaker. But remember, it took time to become addicted, so naturally it takes time to become unaddicted, but it will happen. Now let's put the techniques together and create your own vision.